Back in the 1970s, America was a different world, where danger often hid behind what felt like freedom. In part one, we uncovered some of the shocking things that were totally legal back then, but were just getting started. From radioactive medicine cabinets to dynamite at your local hardware store, part two dives even deeper into the laws that didn't exist and the risks people never questioned. Let's take another look at the wild world of 1970s America. Number 1. Identity theft. In 1970, there were no specific laws against identity theft. That's because the very concept barely existed. If someone used your name or social security number to open a bank account or take out a loan, it might be seen as fraud. But there was no legal category for simply pretending to be you. Back then, personal information wasn't guarded like it is today. People printed their social security numbers on checks, shared them freely on forms, and never thought twice about it. The idea that someone could build a new life or destroy yours using only a few stolen details just wasn't on the public's radar. It wasn't until the rise of digital banking and online records in the 80s and 90s that lawmakers finally caught on. Today, identity theft is a federal crime, but in 1970, you were mostly on your own. Number 2, credit. In 1970, a woman could be denied a credit card simply because she wasn't married. Even if she had a job, paid her bills, and handled her own finances, banks often required a husband's signature for approval. The logic at the time? Men were seen as the financial backbone of the household, and women were considered too risky on their own. Some lenders even refused to issue credit unless a woman agreed to reapply using her husband's income. It wasn't until 1974, with the passage of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, that this practice was outlawed. That law finally gave women the legal right to open credit lines, take out loans, and manage their money without needing anyone else's permission. Looking back, it's hard to believe this was ever normal. But for millions of women in 1970, financial independence was something they had to fight for. Number 3, private radio. In the early 1970s, just about anyone could set up a small radio transmitter and start broadcasting. No license, no paperwork, no oversight. This was the golden age of pirate radio, where basement DJs and local rebels took to the airwaves with their own music, opinions, and late-night talk shows. It wasn't entirely legal, but it wasn't strictly enforced either. The FCC had rules on the books, but many small-time operators flew under the radar, especially if their signal stayed local and didn't interfere with commercial stations. This underground radio scene helped shape local culture and gave voice to people who otherwise wouldn't be heard. But by the late 70s, enforcement tightened and unlicensed broadcasting became a serious offense. For a while, though, the airwaves belonged to the people, and freedom had its own frequency. Number 4, gender discrimination. In 1970, job ads in American newspapers were often separated by gender, and no one thought twice about it. There were help-wanted male sections for managers, engineers, and salesmen, and help-wanted female for secretaries, typists, and receptionists. Despite the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which technically banned gender discrimination, enforcement lagged. Employers used coded language or outright separated listings, and newspapers went right along with it. If you were a woman applying for a man's job, your resume might never be seen. It took years of lawsuits, activism, and new legal interpretations before these ads finally disappeared. By the late 1970s, the practice had faded, but not without a fight. Today, the idea of gender-labeled job listings seems outrageous. But back then, it was printed in black and white, right on page 3 of your Sunday paper. Number 5, mercury. For decades, 2 of the most common antiseptics found in American homes were mercurochrome and merthiolate, bright red liquids that stung like crazy but made every kid feel brave. What most families didn't know was that both contained mercury. At the time, mercury wasn't seen as particularly dangerous in small amounts. These products were stocked in nearly every bathroom cabinet and used on everything from scraped knees to paper cuts. No one questioned it. It was just what you reached for. But over time, science caught up. Concerns over mercury toxicity grew, especially with repeated exposure. By the early 1990s, the FDA declared these products unsafe and pulled them from the market. Still, for an entire generation, those little glass bottles were a rite of passage. A red stained knee meant you'd been through something, and you had the badge to prove it. Number 6, car safety. In 1970, car safety looked very different, especially for children. It was perfectly legal for a baby to ride on a parent's lap in the front seat. No seatbelt, no car seat, just arms and instincts. Child car seats did exist, but they weren't required by law, and most of them were designed more for convenience than protection. They were flimsy, often looked like booster chairs, and didn't do much in a crash. Parents didn't see it as reckless. It was just the way things were done. A quick drive to the store meant tossing the kids in the back, or even letting them lie down on the rear window shelf during long trips. It wasn't until the 1980s that proper child restraint laws came into play. But for much of the 70s, safety was more about luck than law. Number 7, railroads. In 1970, it wasn't uncommon to see someone riding the rails, illegally hopping onto freight trains in search of work, freedom, or simply the next town over. While technically considered trespassing, it wasn't always enforced, and for many, it was a way of life. This tradition stretched back to the Great Depression, when thousands of Americans became hobos, traveling the country by train. Even decades later, the image of a lone traveler with a bedroll and a tin cup still lingered on the outskirts of American life. By the late 20th century, stricter enforcement and changes in freight operations made the practice far more dangerous and much more illegal. But in 1970, it was still possible to disappear onto the rails and chase a different kind of freedom. For a generation of drifters, the open boxcar was both transportation and escape. Number 8, smoking. In the 1970s, cigarettes weren't just accepted, they were everywhere. You could smoke in restaurants, on airplanes, even inside hospitals. But one of the most striking images from that era? NFL players lighting up on the sidelines. It wasn't unusual to see coaches, players, and even broadcasters puffing away during games right in front of the cameras. Cigarette ads still ran during commercial breaks, and tobacco companies sponsored entire teams. Smoking wasn't seen as a health hazard. It was just part of the culture. Over time, the science became clearer. The Surgeon General's warnings grew stronger, and public attitudes shifted. By the 1980s, the smoking on the field was banned, and tobacco's grip on sports began to loosen. But for anyone who grew up watching football in the 70s, the memory of a quarterback with a cigarette between plays is hard to forget. It was a different time and a different kind of tough. Number 9, skeletons. In 1970, if you walked into a high school biology class or a medical lab, there was a good chance the skeleton hanging in the corner was real. Not plastic, not a model, a real human skeleton. These bones were often imported from overseas, typically from India or China, and sold in bulk to schools, universities, and research labs. There were few regulations and almost no concern about consent or origin. For most people, it was just a teaching tool. Eventually, growing ethical concerns and changes to international law brought an end to the trade. Synthetic skeletons became the norm, and using actual human remains became both rare and heavily restricted. But for decades, generations of students learned anatomy from the bones of strangers, never knowing who they once belonged to. In classrooms across America, the dead quietly taught the living. Number 10, Dalkon Shield. One of the most controversial medical devices of the 1970s was the Dalkon Shield, a contraceptive device heavily marketed to women as safe, simple, and modern. But behind the ads and reassurances was a dangerous design flaw that would harm thousands. The Dalkon Shield caused infections, infertility, miscarriages, and even death. Yet despite early warnings from doctors and patient advocates, it remained on the market for years. Many women weren't told the risks. Some were never given a choice. By 1974, lawsuits and public pressure finally forced the manufacturer to pull it from the shelves. But for many, the damage was done. The Dalkon Shield became a cautionary tale, one that reshaped how the medical industry handles women's health products. Looking back, it's hard to believe it was ever approved. But in 1970, trust in authority often outweighed personal safety, and women paid the price. Number 11, tanning. In the 1970s, a deep tan wasn't just fashionable, it was a symbol of health, beauty, and status. People spent hours baking in the sun or rubbing on tanning lotions that promised a golden glow. What they didn't know was that many of those products contain ingredients we now know to be carcinogenic. Back then, no one talked about SPF. Sunscreen was rare, and skin cancer was barely part of the conversation. The darker your tan, the better you looked, regardless of the long-term cost. It took decades of medical research, public awareness campaigns, and rising cancer rates to shift that mindset. Eventually, ingredients were banned, and sunscreen became a household staple. But in 1970, suntan oils ruled the beach, and people chased that bronze look with no idea of the damage being done. Beauty came first, warnings came later. Number 12, Dynamite. Yes, you could legally buy Dynamite at the hardware store in 1970. No special license, no background check. Just sign the logbook, pay at the counter, and walk out with sticks of high explosives, right next to the nails and paint thinner. Farmers used it to clear stumps, contractors blasted through rock, and anyone with a legitimate reason could pick some up. The safety standards? Pretty much left up to you. Over time, regulations tightened. Explosives became restricted, tracked, and heavily licensed. But back then, it wasn't unusual to see dynamite behind the counter like it was just another tool in the shed. It sounds unthinkable today, but that was 1970, a time when responsibility often came down to common sense, and power was literally at your fingertips. The 1970s were a wild time, when freedom came with fewer rules and a whole lot more risk. If you remember any other things that used to be legal, but would shock people today, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more memories from the America we grew up in. Until next time, stay curious, stay nostalgic,